season, upgrade and save with the team at Legacy Heating and Air and Daikin. Right now, when you upgrade to select Daikin systems, you can receive up to $3,500 in rebates and incentives. The revolutionary Daikin Fit system is built to fit your space and your budget. And with flexible financing and payment plans to suit any budget, plus no payments or interest until 2026, an upgrade doesn't have to wait. This deal won't last long. Schedule your free in-home estimate today. Visit LegacyHeatingandAirInc.com to view exclusive offers and get qualified now.
All right. Welcome, everybody, to Football Never Sleeps, the weekly live YouTube show from Inside ND Sports, brought to you by the fine folks at Legacy Heating and Air. I'm Tyler James. Eric Hansen is off this week, enjoying some much-deserved vacation, so we won't be aspiring to be viral tonight, but maybe tonight's co-host can take us to new heights. We're joined by Rivals national recruiting analyst Greg Smith, who covers a lot of ground in the Midwest for us. Greg, thanks for taking time out of your evening for us.
Hey, thanks for having me, and I appreciate the invite. I don't know. We'll see if I can do anything that'll have us go viral. I don't know if I have any hot takes ready for you, but we'll see. We'll see if we get there.
All right. Well, I can't forget our usual YouTube reminders. Please make sure you're subscribed to the channel here on Inside ND Sports. Hit the bell for reminders of when we have content and tap that like button to support the show. If you're new to the YouTube process, make sure you've clicked through, not watching us embedded somewhere so you can comment and ask questions. There's a spot to do that on the right-hand side if you're on a desktop, below our talking heads if you're on a mobile device. If you're not a subscriber to our website, we hope you consider taking advantage of our 30-day free trial to InsideNDSports.com. Use promo code NDYT, which is exclusive to you guys here on YouTube when you sign up to get a free access to our premium analysis and recruiting coverage and special access to us on the Insider Lounge, which is where we spend a lot of our time and share our inside information first. Like yesterday, I shared some interviews with Notre Dame's newest Irish Invasion offers last evening after the camp. There's a link to sign up for that deal in the video description below. And let's get right to it. Let's start with the commitment news from this past weekend. Notre Dame both added and lost a commitment over the weekend. Quarterback Noah Grubbs joined the 2026 Irish class, and wide receiver Shaun Terry left Notre Dame's top-ranked 2025 class. Let's start with Grubbs, Greg. He's a four-star recruit, ranked number 44 overall in the 2026 class by Rivals, which the rankings are updating this week, so we'll see where he comes out in the new rankings. He's the number 3 pro-style quarterback, 6'4", 205 pounds. Committed over offers from Florida, Miami, Michigan, Ohio State, Penn State. Had a very impressive offer list. He camped at Notre Dame last summer and then returned for the Irish Invasion on Sunday. What kind of quarterback do you think Notre Dame is getting in Grubbs?
Yeah, I think they're getting a good one, and one that is not a finished product. That's something that I like to see. I think within, quarterbacks in general, but I think you're definitely seeing it with Notre Dame quarterbacks that they're taking guys that still have room to grow. So guys that we don't feel are maxed out, and that's a good thing, right? And I think that Grubbs, with his frame, about 6'4", 185, 90 pounds, is a kid that's got a pretty good arm. He's more of a touch passer at this point than he is just a, sling it all over the yard and just beat you with a power arm. But that's okay. That'll get it done in college football, especially if you have it, throw with anticipation. The other thing that I really like about Grubbs that I think raises his ceiling quite a bit is that he's pretty mobile in the pocket, right? I think he's a kid that moves around well. He's not necessarily a dual threat quarterback. He's not doing a lot of zone reads and looking to run in that way, but he's definitely a kid that can evade pressure, can use his legs to set up passes down the field as well. I think he's a really quality addition to what they've got going there at Notre Dame.
Yeah, he has a sort of short, quick release on his throws, and getting to see that in person, I don't think it's a bad thing. I think maybe you can make that longer on some deeper throws to help him with some more deep throws. But I think he can throw deep and on time pretty well. He'll take some chances. Yeah, he's definitely not a statue. He's certainly not a dual threat guy like Deuce Knight. Right. And I know the other guy that Notre Dame was heavily considering was Brady Hart in the 2026 class. I think he's maybe a little bit more mobile than Noah Grubbs is, but someone that I think is going to be able to pick up yards with his legs when needed. And I think it's an important addition for Notre Dame to continue its really strong quarterback recruiting. Notre Dame now has CJ Carr, Deuce Knight, and Noah Grubbs in back-to-back-to-back classes, as long as Knight and Grubbs end up signing.
Yeah.
What does that recent string of quarterback recruiting for Notre Dame say about where the Irish are heading?
Yeah, I think it says really good things about where they're heading at quarterback, because I think that you feel good about all of those guys and kind of where they are with their development and the fact that they can still continue to get better, but you like where they are right now. Sometimes we say things like, oh, that guy's a project. He's got that really is code for, I don't know about that one. These guys are not projects, but they are also not finished products. And I think that applies to all of them, which is a very good thing. I really like Deuce Knight as a side note. I like CJ Carr during the process as well, for that matter. So I like the quarterbacks that they're bringing in. All of them have good leadership. They're all winners. They're guys that are going to help you in your locker room as well. I think that you can tell that Notre Dame definitely has a type of quarterback that they're going for, like kind of intangibles wise. I think that that's where there's a lot of similarities with all of those guys. And so I think as a Notre Dame fan, you should be pretty pumped about the type of quarterback room that they're building right now.
Yeah, I think you're excited about the quarterbacks. I think you step back, it's like, well, not all these guys will pan out, right? Like there's a very low chance that all three of these guys play through their Notre Dame careers and end up getting drafted as a Notre Dame quarterback. That's just not how quarterback
Not
works.
how it goes anymore.
Yeah.
No.
And even at the NFL level, you got great college quarterbacks. They don't all turn out. It's like a 50-50 proposition almost in terms of if you're going to be right on a guy. So when you're taking a high schooler and taking him to college, I think it's even harder to know for sure who's going to pan out. But then when you stack them all together, you increase your chances and someone's going to hit. I think I would probably rank them CJ Carr, Deuce Knight, and Grubbs, sort of interestingly, the order that they've committed year by year in terms of guys that I think I like the most right now. Obviously, Deuce Knight and Noah Grubbs have much more left in their high school careers to maybe get to a point where maybe I like them more than CJ Carr when he was entering Notre Dame. But it's an impressive run. Notre Dame only once before has signed 3 Rivals 100 quarterbacks in 3 consecutive classes, and that was 2006 and 2008 with Demetrius Jones, Jimmy Clausen, and Dane Christ. And that's an example. Like those are 3 guys. Jimmy Clausen was the best of those group.
What happened?
And then the other guys are like, yeah, what happened to those guys? So, and interestingly enough, I looked back. Brian Kelly during his tenure, he signed 3 Rivals 100 guys. Gunnar Kiel, Brandon Wimbush, and Phil Dracovic, and none of those guys necessarily met the expectations that they have for them. The difference was that they were more spaced out. Those guys were 2012, 2015, and 2018. Notre Dame under Marcus Freeman right now, with Gino Guidugli as the quarterbacks coach, and now Mike Denbrock as the offensive coordinator. They're really recruiting quarterbacks at a high level consistently, and I think that's going to pay off for Notre Dame in the long run.
Yeah, and I also think that that's something that I think is an overall theme of what Notre Dame has going on right now. Is I think that the recruiting in general, you talk about quarterback recruiting kind of getting ramped up a couple notches. I feel like that's what they're doing overall. Like it's just as a general thing, I really like what they have going on in terms of pushing for these earlier commitments. You mentioned kind of off top, they currently at that number 1 ranked recruiting class based on a lot of the early work that they did. I feel like they found something that's working as far as how to, on one hand, be patient in the process, and we'll talk about that a little bit when it comes to like the offers that they made, say, from Irish Invasion. They did not make a lot of them, right? They don't like spray and pray offers out there, but at the same time, when they have guys that are interested now, they're really starting to push for those commitments early and then kind of seeing if they can keep them in the boat, which is a difference in kind of how they had gone about things before.
Sure. Yeah, I think that is what Notre Dame's counting on. I think people are very nervous with Deuce Knight from time to time when he's Ole Miss and Alabama coming after him. But Deuce, I mean, he gets to Notre Dame just about every chance he can. Like he's spending a lot of time and money to get to Notre Dame on frequent occasions just to get up to the Irish Invasion, just to work out with Notre Dame's coaching staff. And then he'll be back for an official visit later this month. So he's making a lot of effort to recruit other guys in the class. And yeah, that's been a big part of Notre Dame's game plan is like, let's get commitments and then get them to stick. And it worked out pretty well in the last class. They've had 3 decommitments now in the 2025 class. And the most recent one was Shaun Terry, which came this past weekend, who we mentioned earlier. his commitment sort of seemed shaky from the moment we learned that he made a visit to Missouri in the spring. That was first reported by Power Mizzou, our rivals Missouri site. And then when I was doing some reporting to follow up on that, he seemingly denied that happened to Notre Dame. And so it was who's lying
never,
to who
never a good sign
situation. And I was like, well, I don't know why our reporters would make that up. It doesn't, and Missouri isn't going to benefit from saying a kid visited if he didn't visit it. So that was a strange situation. And Shaun Terry's backed off his commitment now. Notre Dame was continuing to offer and look at some other receivers. And so now clears the way with just 2 receivers committed, Jerome Bettis Jr. and Elijah Burris, Plaxico Burris' son. Shaun Terry actually had the higher rivals rating of the 3 in Notre Dame's class previously. How big of a loss do you think Shaun Terry is?
What's funny about this loss and that question is it depends on who they replace him with.
Right.
Is honestly the truth. Because they've got some guys on the board still that are very good. Derek Meadows being one of them. Like there's a bunch of guys that I think that they're still in play with, that if they land a couple of those guys, then we're really not going to be talking about the loss of Shaun Terry. And it's no disrespect to him. It's just kind of where some of those other guys are. I think that he is a good player. I don't know that he was a game changer that would come in and kind of set the world on fire. And so he's a guy, Terry, that, his high school team uses him all over the place. Like they'll line him up outside in the slot, kind of in the backfield to get him involved. He's more quick than fast, if that makes sense. And so I like him. I think that Notre Dame, for where they are and what they're trying to do, especially at and it's all tied together. When you're getting this level of quarterbacks, that generally means that you can, step the game up when it comes to wide receiver. I think they'll be able to do that with a couple of those guys. So I think in the end, it won't be a huge loss. It just always kind of stinks when you're in the middle of it.
Yeah. And I know back when Notre Dame first started pursuing Terry, I had heard that they had some concerns about his speed and wanted to get him on campus for a camp this summer. And then they went ahead and took his commitment anyways. So that was a little bit surprising to me when that happened. And now the sides have gone their own ways. Where do you think Terry is expected to look next? Where do you think he will end up? Do you think there's a leader right now?
Yeah, so I talked to him about that over the weekend, actually, and it's funny you mentioned Missouri. Mizzou was definitely one of the teams. I think it was the first team that he mentioned, kind of when he said, that he named the teams that had been, quote, talking to him through this. So through the time he was committed were Mizzou, Kentucky, Clemson, West Virginia, and USC. He added a Nebraska offer yesterday, right after he decommitted as well. I think Mizzou is the team to watch, I guess, most right here, but they're kind of in an interesting situation too. Like, I don't know how much you've been following what's going on with them. They're taking some big swings on the recruiting trail. Their NIL operation, very good. And so I think that that's going to be one that if he wants to get in on that class, he's going to probably want to do that sooner rather than later, because they're looking to add some really good players to that class. We'll kind of see. I think that in this case, we may see him he feels to me like he could end up at a West Virginia or somewhere like that after all the dust is settled.
Okay. Yeah. And that's not far from where he is there in Ironton, Ohio. So we'll see what happens in his recruitment, but it no longer includes Notre Dame. Let's grab a couple questions here. Ryan Walke asked, do you think Brady Hart is upset that Noah Grubbs took a spot he could have had? I don't think that's true, or that's the case. Brady Hart and Noah Grubbs actually work with the same quarterback trainer, so I think they were very much on the same page. They're both from Florida. I think they sort of knew it was sort of a first come, first serve situation. So if Brady Hart wanted the spot, he certainly could have reserved it before Noah Grubbs beat him to it. And Brady Hart doesn't have a shortage of options right now. So no, I think he'll land fine on his feet. But certainly he liked Notre Dame quite a bit, and Notre Dame liked him as well. But Noah Grubbs is the one that Notre Dame was ended up getting.
Yeah, and ultimately, kind of like we were saying too about, you push for those commitments, and basically, I'm sure they were honest in the process. And hey, you want this spot? Come take it. And I'm assuming either one of them could have had it, but Noah jumped at it first.
And then Rajon says, to me, it seems the ND staff is doing their due diligence on recruits earlier in the process. I would agree with that. I think
totally.
Notre Dame has a very well-oiled machine going right now, with Chad Bowden leading it, getting a promotion this offseason. That would have been interesting to see what would have happened if he did leave for Michigan. But Marcus Freeman did not want that to happen. And I don't know that Chad necessarily wanted to leave either, but
I don't think so.
It was an enticing option for him. Notre Dame has done a really good job with him leading the recruiting efforts. He does a good job of making connections with recruits. And the better connections you make, I think you get a better sense for, okay, is this a Notre Dame kid?
Yeah.
Do you feel you're having more honest conversations with the kids? You have a better sense of, okay, are we really in the running for him, or is he just telling us that he's interested? And so I think Notre Dame has done a really good job of getting a good sense of where they stand with kids, and then if those kids are sort of viable for them in terms of Notre Dame student athletes.
Yeah, and with Chad, I'm on that one. I'm always curious what would have happened if it was Jim Harbaugh making that call to get him up to Ann Arbor.
Sure.
That's I just thought that all along, like, he's very comfortable there at Notre Dame. I just feel like that was a tougher sell once it wasn't Harbaugh, but good for Notre Dame for keeping him.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. A bit more uncertainty at Michigan right now, probably.
Yeah.
Especially with him. Chad have followed Marcus Freeman to Cincinnati. There's a bit more comfort there, like you mentioned. Another question Rajon submitted here: how important is being the first one in the door with recruits? And Rajon, do you mean like being the first one to offer, like, or being an early offer for a kid? I assume that's what you mean. I don't. I think it does mean something. A lot of times, those first offers usually aren't the bigger schools, though. So it might be a school that it's like, well, that was really cool. I'm really glad that they the first one to offer me, but it's also like I ended up getting a lot better options there. Notre Dame typically isn't, and Rajon confirmed that I am answering the question as he meant it. Notre Dame isn't very often the first offer, but sometimes it can just be the conversations too. Like, even if it's not an offer, just showing interest and following up with recruits, that can matter too, or just getting them on campus, inviting them to campus for a visit. That can all matter. What's your experience as it relates to that? Obviously, maybe not just with Notre Dame guys, but other guys that you've covered across the country.
Yeah, it comes up a decent amount, and it is interesting. I think what you're saying is dead on. It tends to be how do I say this? The smaller schools generally go first, right? And then as the schools get bigger, it doesn't matter if that offer came in late. It matters, like you were saying, if they had that communication. I can actually give you a really good example of this, of a guy that you guys had on campus this past weekend. Gavin Mueller is an emerging tight end for 2026 out of Illinois. If you saw the clips over the weekend, he's kind of a freak athlete.
Yeah.
But he has not played a down of high school football yet, and he's getting offers from quite a few schools right now, and some pretty good ones. But Notre Dame told him they weren't going to offer this weekend because they want to see like actual game film, and they did. They were honest with that. And then they told him that he's got an open invitation to come back in the fall for a game. And he was totally happy with that. He also told me that, because I asked him, hey, if and when they do offer, like, will they move way up on your list? And he said they definitely be a top consideration because he's very Catholic and he's always watched Notre Dame. So it kind of goes to what we were saying. If the team is good and the kid already had that team kind of had his eye on that team, it's not going to really matter when they offer. Like, it matters more about when they actually start to build that relationship, even before that offer.
Yeah, for sure. I think it depends on prestige in some way.
Not every school can do that. I would say that.
Right.
Not every school can do that.
Yeah, there are schools out there that they're, like you said, like Notre Dame isn't necessarily as sort of spread shot as some of these other schools.
Yeah.
Like Tennessee seemingly offers everyone. Louisville,
Iowa
offers
State.
seemingly
Iowa
everyone.
State is one. But even though they do a very good job of identifying guys early that are going to be good, but they put out a ton of offers, knowing that eventually they're going to fall out of it with those kids. Like there will be kids that got offered at Iowa State this weekend from their camp that go on to get Notre Dame offers, or Michigan offers, or that sort of thing. It's like clockwork every year. Like some schools, they have to be first in the door with that. Others, like Notre Dame, it's not that much of a concern.
All right, I'll take this one from Chris W. before we move on to what's next at wide receiver as it relates to Shaun Terry. Did Shaun Terry leave or get pushed out? I would say he left, Chris, from my reporting. I think that Notre Dame was maybe mulling its options in terms of like, okay, we have a number of receivers that we're interested in. If all these guys want in, what do we do? But I think it was Terry sort of prompted it. I think that he was aware of what was going on and sort of the maybe shaky ground he was on by visiting Missouri. So Notre Dame wasn't like begging him to stay. But Shaun Terry made the decision to leave the class when he did. And that's why he decommitted this past weekend.
And that happens. That is something that happens quite a bit, where it is almost always started by this, hey, I wanted to go visit somewhere else. I either did or did not tell the team that I'm committed to that I wanted to visit.
Right.
And then that starts to break that trust, right? Like then you're like, okay, is that kid looking around? And then ultimately both sides have to find, the best and most trusting fit for each other, right?
Yeah, exactly. All right. And now as it relates to what's left at wide receiver for Notre Dame, they, like I mentioned earlier, they still have the 2 commitments from Jerome Bettis Jr. and Elijah Burris. Those are 3-star recruits. The newest target is in-state receiver John Anthony Hall from Fishers, Indiana. He quickly set up an official visit. Greg was on that reporting right away for June 11th to 13th after you received an offer on Friday. What kind of prospect do you see Hall as?
Yeah, it's interesting. I rarely say this as we're doing updates and all of that. I think I was a little conservative on his most recent rating. I think he is better than his ranking indicates, which, hey, you can yell at me about that because I'm the one that sets it. And so he's a kid that has really emerged and burst onto the scene here lately, right? His junior film is pretty good. He's been doing well on the camp circuit this offseason. I think he's got a little bit more size than Terry does. Like he's a little bit bigger, more of an outside receiver, good body control, good hands. Like there's some nice highlight catches kind of on his huddle tape where he's making, toe tap grabs on the sideline. Like he does a good job with body positioning, not necessarily going to run away from guys. Like he is more of a chain mover, I would say. But I like him as a receiver. He's a good he'll be a good college football player, once he picks a school.
Yeah, Michigan was one of his recent offers. I think he was on an official visit already to Stanford this past weekend. Has Purdue and Indiana official visits scheduled this past weekend? Or no, so I don't think he was maybe he's at Stanford next weekend because this past weekend he was competing in the state track meet. He finished second.
Yeah, because he won some stuff, right, or did well in that.
Yeah, he finished second in the state in a long jump with 23 feet 1 inch. So quite the distance he jumped there. Yeah. And so an explosive athlete, maybe more explosive than fast, like you were talking about. Yeah. Maybe not a guy that's going to run away from you, but certainly has some hops. Notre Dame has had a longer list of receivers. I guess it's been shortening, but it's still a decent size list in terms of options that are planning to get on campus for official visits this month. 3 other wide receivers were previously scheduled. Tanook Hines is first up this weekend. Dylan Robinson with a midweek visit next week. So he'll be here the same time as John Anthony Hall. And then Derek Meadows and Talon Taylor on the June 14th to 16th weekend. Those are the real big-time guys that Notre Dame would love to have. We'll see if they can beat out some of the big dogs that are also trying to get those guys. I know Taylor is someone that you have future casted to Georgia. I think that happened sometime this spring. Do you think Notre Dame can make a run at him to change that?
I do think that Notre Dame can make a run there. It's really, that situation is so interesting to me. I have seen him 2 or 3 times this offseason. I've gotten to know him and the family pretty well. So we had a good pulse there. But I think that Notre Dame would be a really good option for him. It's just whether or not, I think the idea of playing in the SEC and going to Georgia, which is like the school right now, is
Right.
really going to be the thing that is ultimately the pull. I know that Notre Dame and others are trying to push hey, Georgia's great right now. But what have they really done with receivers? I know that that's part of the thing, and hey, that it's a fair criticism because it's really like the only criticism you can have of Georgia, right?
Right.
He was there this weekend for an official visit. I haven't quite caught up with him yet. We had some wires across yesterday. We're supposed to talk to him today. We'll see how it goes. But I do think Notre Dame has a chance there. But I do think that pull to play in the SEC is something that's really strong. And he's got good relationships with the staff at Notre Dame. He's got good ones with Georgia as well. I think those are kind of the 2 main contenders for him, but I do still like Georgia to win out in the end on that.
Yeah, it's hard for Notre Dame to be like, well, what's Georgia done with receivers? Because Notre Dame hasn't exactly had a long track record with receivers, although Mike Brown at Cincinnati had a good track record with receivers. And that is Notre Dame's wide receivers coach now. So maybe that can play in Notre Dame's favor. It's been an interesting recruitment with him because he's an Illinois kid, has been on campus a few times, but it's never just felt like Notre Dame's the place for me. And so when that doesn't happen, that obviously keeps the door open for some of these schools like Georgia to get in there. I know Ohio State was kicking the tires there for a while. And so we'll see what happens. But yeah, I think I wouldn't rule out Notre Dame by any means, but I do think they do have work to do there. In terms of Taylor as a player, what do you think makes him so good? Why is he so coveted?
Yeah, he's so smooth. Like, he's such a smooth route runner. He's got kind of a tall, lean frame that you can just see will continue to be built upon when he gets to college. He catches everything that comes around him as well. He's got enough speed to pull away from teams as well, or pull away from guys as well. But I just really like his route running. And the other thing too, when it comes to that's because, like I said, I spent some time around him. His mentality is very good. Like, quick story. We were at one of the camps I saw him at this off season. He didn't have his best performance. He was still pretty good. Like, he was one of the better receivers there. But he wasn't happy with what he did there. And he told me, he was like, man, Greg, I'm going to go down to my next thing and I'm going to really ball out. His next thing was down in Orlando at OT7 for 7-on-7. And he put on a show down there. Our colleague John Garcia was down there and was just super impressed with how well he played. And I told John about how he said that he wanted to go ball out on the next thing. And to me, that's just a great glimpse into his mindset and the way that he's always striving for more. And that's something that you want in your players, but you definitely want that in your wide receivers, because you need to have that kind of mentality to thrive at that position.
Yeah, and I'm sure it makes the rankings conversations a little easier when he goes out to see do that in front of John, and you're not like, hey, I'm not the only one that thinks.
Yeah, it's always helpful when I am not the only one. Like, I'm never comfortable with being the only person that's like, no, this guy really needs to shoot up the rankings, or he needs to be here. I like to have some confirmation from other guys on the team. I do like that.
Yeah, and so I mentioned the other guys that are scheduled for visible visits. I'll give some quick notes on those guys for folks that maybe aren't as dialed in or maybe lapsed a little bit in the recruiting heading into a official visit season. Like I mentioned, Tanook Hines will visit first this weekend. I think Notre Dame's in a decent spot in his recruitment. I think he offers the speed that Notre Dame really needs in this class. Out of the Houston area, number 54 receiver, a 4-star recruit, according to Rivals, a 5.8 4-star recruit. Dylan Robinson is a recent target who brings size. He made his first official visit to Washington this past weekend. 6'3", 190 pounds, 4-star athlete, the number 16th athlete in the country in the 2025 class. Meadows, like we mentioned, is a longtime target that Notre Dame's fighting off pushes from Alabama, Georgia, LSU, and Michigan. He made an official visit to Michigan last weekend. He's the size and speed. He has it both. He's 6'6", 195 pounds, and he can fly. Number 10 receiver in the country, number 61 overall. Not surprising that these bigger schools and even schools from the South are trying to pull him out of Las Vegas. Notre Dame liked where it was early. It's getting some pressure now. We'll see if when he gets back to campus, they can maybe close on that. That would certainly be Notre Dame's preference. as someone they've liked for quite some time, as he got an offer after camping at Notre Dame last summer. And then one more recent offer, Malik Clark out of Rock Hill, South Carolina. I'm interested to see where the Irish could fit in with his interest in some other schools. He's got official visits South Carolina, North Carolina, and NC State on his schedule, and then visited Georgia, I think, last week. 6'2", 270 pounds, a 4-star, number 49 receiver. Rock Hill has had some success over the years in producing Notre Dame guys. Nick McLeod, who transferred from NC State, and Jeff Burgess are famously from Rock Hill, so maybe Notre Dame can find some success there again in South Carolina.
Hey, and with Meadows, when does his official visit fall? Is Notre Dame going last on that one?
I don't think so. I think there's someone after Notre Dame because he's the 14th or 16th, so there's that one more official visit weekend. I don't remember which school is next on the list for him. So that's maybe the one thing that makes you feel a little bit uneasy. But sometimes kids be like, "Hey, I don't need to follow through on that official visit."
That final weekend will have the most shuffles of visits of any of them. That one always does, right? Like you always see that. Like you'll see like that very first weekend, you'll get some guys start to come off the board, right? The second one is generally not as much because if you're going to take that second visit, you'll probably take the third one, right? And then so you get that third one, and then you see a big slew of guys come off the board, and then that last visit weekend always all of the shuffling around of what happens and teams and guys scrambling to get those visits in after kind of the board's reshuffled.
Yep. All right, let's grab these questions from Jeff Stevens before we get on to some Irish invasion talk. Jeff Stevens asked, any chance that Will Black ends up with 5 stars? I don't know how much you've got to see Will Black, Greg, but I know he made a big jump into the Rivals 100 this past rankings update last week. He even went ahead of Owen Strebig out of Wisconsin, who's been the Rivals 100 guy. They're both now on the Rivals 100. I think there's a chance based on the discussions I had with Adam Freeman. I don't think he would rule that out. I think one thing it's harder to determine with Will Black because of the competition that he plays against, of exactly how good he is. But in terms of the skill set, the projection seems to be there for him. I think he might not be a guy that comes in right away and plays, but I think he is a guy that is athletic, can move, he's strong. So I really like what they have there, and we'll see if he continues to climb up the rankings.
Yeah, I've not seen or watched Will Black, but I have been in on those discussions. And yes, I think that he's got a shot. I would not speak for Friedman on this one. I would say he has a shot. The way that they flipped him and Strebig this time was interesting. That was not necessarily my doing. But at the same time, the good thing though about that situation is that we're going to get another evaluation point on Owen because Owen will be down at Rivals 5-star at Jacksonville later on this month. And so that'll be great to see kind of how that goes, because one of the things that happens often, and Notre Dame fans probably know this because you recruit so many elite Midwest offensive linemen, is that those Midwest offensive linemen do very well at their high school team because they're used to being road graders and they can go out there and lean on guys. And then they get into like those camp settings or the all-star games, and they struggle a little bit because they're not used to seeing those elite pass rushers, right? And then there's an adjustment period, and then those guys go on to be All-Americans in college, right? And then become NFL players later down the road. There's just that adjustment. So that's really the thing that we need to see with Owen, is whether or not he can kind of continue to improve that foot speed to keep up with some of those guys. And again, he will definitely get the opportunity down in Jacksonville at the end of the month.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that. And there's a couple Notre Dame commits and a handful of targets that'll be down there. So we'll get plenty of insight into what those guys look like and what's going on in the recruitment for the guys that aren't already committed to Notre Dame. I'm looking forward to getting down to Jacksonville. Another question from Jeff Stevens: what are the odds? And this is a Notre Dame team one, so I'll take this one, Greg. Okay. What are the odds, scale of 1 to 10, 10 being no doubt, that Ben Morrison starts versus Texas A&M? Is 8 too high? And it's a good question for those that missed it. Benjamin Morrison, as Marcus Freeman explained to a group of reporters last week, including myself and Eric Hansen, that he might not be 100% clear till close to the Texas A&M game. So if he's not getting cleared until close to the game, I think there's some doubt as to whether or not he would be able to play. I certainly would be a loss if he can't go, as Notre Dame's top cornerback and someone who's projected as a potential first-round pick after his junior season. So 7 or 8 would probably be where I'd put it at. I don't sense that there's a major concern quite yet, but obviously there will be a time crunch there. I think Notre Dame should play it smart. Like, I don't think they want to rush Benjamin Morrison back to the field because you need him the rest of the season. So certainly you would want to have him out there against a Texas A&M team that is going to be fired up to play against Notre Dame to start the season. But I think Notre Dame, if it has to, will take its chances on Jaden Mickey and Christian Gray out there as starters if Benjamin Morrison can't go. All right, let's get back to some Irish Invasion talk. So I was at the Irish Invasion on Sunday. Notre Dame held its annual camp. It's invite only. It's pretty good showing. Like you mentioned earlier, Notre Dame didn't offer a ton of guys. They haven't in recent years been offering a lot, especially as they're very strategic with the class ahead. So the 2027 class, they'll like do a big offer spree next March for their pot of gold day. Yeah,
and kids love that. Like, they do love that.
Yeah, but when they're on campus for a camp like this, they also like to give those guys like, hey, that you really performed today. We like what you did. So they reward some guys. So a couple of the 2027 guys did get offers. Cornerback Larry Moon out of Aliquippa, Pennsylvania, and 2027 athlete Dakota Garrett. I may be butchering his last name. I should have asked that when I spoke to him earlier today. He's a wide receiver cornerback from Harper Woods, Michigan, and he was also at our rivals camp in Indianapolis. So I wanted to get your thoughts on him, Greg. He actually spent most of his time at Sunday's camp playing defense, and he caught my eye playing receiver. He was actually the reason I noticed him is I was doing a lot of filming of Trey Taylor, the 2027 quarterback, and those guys played 7-on-7 together. I was like, hey, you had a real good connection with that Dakota kid. He's like, yeah, we played 7-on-7 together, and I was like, he looked pretty good too. And so it was interesting to see that Notre Dame asked him to play defensive back. There were fewer defensive backs there, so there were more reps available, and Notre Dame liked what it saw. I think Notre Dame's open. They're not necessarily like, you have to play defensive back only for us. He's such a young recruit that it's not necessarily worth nailing that down yet, but
yeah, for sure.
He did well enough to earn an offer. What are your thoughts on him so far?
Yeah, I thought I was with you. He caught my eye at wide receiver. It's kind of he's got really long arms. Like, I remember that. Like, he's got his long arm kid that will continue to grow, obviously, just being a 2027 prospect. I really like the fact that he went out there and then flipped over and played defensive back. And I'm sure the staff liked it as well, because it shows that A, you are willing to just do it. B, that you also were able to do that at a level to then earn an offer as well. That says a lot about him. So good for him on that. But yeah, I really liked his look to begin with, and I'll be curious if down the line that he'll be a kid that some schools will probably really like him at wideout. Some schools will end up wanting him to play defensive back, and so it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. But one of the other kids that they offered this weekend, Larry Moon, I actually kind of randomly saw him last weekend in Detroit. I meant to mention that to you, and I like him as well. Like a kid too, when you talk to him, I didn't realize that he was 2027. I didn't realize that he was that young when you talk to him, because he's kind of got like an older vibe about him. He played very well in that camp, really good in man-to-man coverage, kind of getting guys in a little bit of press and then sticking with them really well. Like, I think he's a really good prospect. He's definitely going to be a national recruit moving forward.
Yeah, and Ryan Walke asked the question, did anyone surprise you at the Irish Invasion? And I would have included Moonen on my list.
Yeah.
That may have been maybe I didn't do enough homework, because it seems like a lot of schools have been getting on him lately, but it was not a name that I was very familiar with. And he definitely stood out at the cornerback position and did some good things there. There weren't a ton of guys that I thought necessarily stood out. I mean, it was nice to see some guys that I hadn't seen before, like Gavin Mueller, to see him get out there and
hear kind of the legend of him after hearing about that. Like, it sounds made up when you first hear about it, and then you see him and you're like, oh, okay.
yeah. I was like, oh, maybe people are just I don't know what they're talking about. And then he gets out there, you're like, oh wow, okay. He did have a couple of drops, but that seems to be not a surprising thing for a guy that's new to the game. But
Right.
so yeah, there were a lot of talented guys out there. I still need to comb through all my film. I want to put together a top performers thing, but I've been prioritizing the recent the new offers, and so I'll have some more thoughts on some of the other guys based off some of the film I got, because I spent a lot of time both watching offensive line and defensive line, and then the receivers and cornerbacks. There weren't very many. I think there was like 3 running backs there, so not a lot of running backs. The linebackers.
That keeps happening. That happened to us at Rivals Camp. We
have a lot of exactly.
It was at a different camp, and that same thing happened. Like, where are all the running backs going?
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe everyone just wants to play receiver, and then they get forced to play running back when it comes to the season.
Right? They just can't catch it, so they get moved out.
The other guy who got an offer that I haven't mentioned is Braylon Womack, and that was not surprising by any stretch. He's a Rivals 100 player in the 2026 class of safety out of Mississippi. A very talented player. He looked good. You could understand why he's a Rivals 100 recruit. He's smooth, athletic, and it was interesting to talk to him after the camp. He is very high on Notre Dame. It really understands what Notre Dame can do for him and is very sold on that. Maybe a bit early in his recruitment to make a prediction in terms of him coming to Notre Dame, but I really like where Notre Dame sits right now. Of course, Deuce Knight, fellow Mississippian, is going to be in his ear and already was in his ear because they were both here yesterday and today, being Monday. So they spending some time together. They were going to go golfing, and Braylon Womack had never golfed before, but he still was convinced that he was going to beat Deuce Knight in golfing.
That's what people say when they haven't golfed before.
That's why I was like, I'm warning you. You're going to have 10 shots that you're like, what am I doing out here? And then you're just going to have that one shot. You're like, oh, okay, I get it now. And then, but yeah, I would have liked to have tagged along for that golfing event. And I wonder how many holes they actually made it through, because I don't think Deuce is. I think he's only golfed a few times too, so he's just getting into it. I think South Bend Deuce Knight is a golfer, I guess, is what we're learning. So
that's great. Catch him out on the course.
He likes to spend some time on the links when he gets up to Notre Dame.
That's funny. One of the other guys, and now the question was up to me about surprises, but a guy I know that was at the camp too, Cam Thomas, the 2026 linebacker, that was also at RCS Indy. I think it's a gold ball for us at linebacker. Mm-hmm. He was a kid that was at that camp. I talked to him afterwards. He did not get an offer because only like 3 guys got an offer. But again, like what we were talking about, and he's not a kid. He's a kid that's already got plenty of offers and some really good ones at that. Yeah. There was a reason though why he came to that Notre Dame camp, and it was to get that offer. So I would say to keep an eye out for that one if he is to get that offer. He did say that he talked to a lot of the staff about the process, and they really liked him. They like how he bulked up. They thought he moved around well out there. And so he's definitely one to kind of keep an eye on to potentially get an offer down the road.
Yeah, I didn't spend, like I mentioned, there weren't many running backs, so I didn't spend a lot of time watching the linebackers go against running backs. I was like, there's just not enough of those guys here. And I've seen Cam in person. He was at our Rivals camp as well, like you mentioned. So I didn't spend a lot of time watching him, although I did see him. He did get thrown into the O-line, D-line one-on-ones because I know he did some pass rushing for Lakota West this past season. And Notre Dame likes to do that with some, especially for their Viper position that they recruit. It's more like a hybrid look. Notre Dame, the one thing when you come to Notre Dame camp, you're going to get some big offensive linemen. Right. And so he didn't necessarily flash in any significant way there. He looked sort of small going up against his guys because, frankly, he is small compared to those guys.
Yeah, and he's still kind of getting bigger. Like he's moved down to kind of that linebacker spot recently because he continues to get bigger, and he will still continue to get bigger after this.
Yeah, but I think it's a good sign that Notre Dame was even willing to put him in that spot and see what he could do, and they were coaching him up and see what he could do in that situation. So we'll see what happens in his recruitment long term. Notre Dame has done a very good job of recruiting linebackers, so it's a high level you got to reach to get recruited at the linebacker position for Notre Dame right now, and we'll see if Cam Thomas meets that standard eventually as they move forward in the process.
Yeah, absolutely.
Justin ND Troll Sniper says, I'd imagine Noah Grubbs' mechanics are further along than Deuce at this point. Did it look that way? I would say, I guess a little bit. Deuce, I think it's more footwork with Deuce. Sometimes I think his footwork maybe is a little bit off, and then the ball tends to sail on him sometimes. Grubbs is a little bit. He has a sort of a unique throwing mechanic in that it is so short and quick, which I think is a good thing. But it does look a little bit different to the eye. But it wasn't like Noah Grubbs was like that much more accurate than Deuce. I think he had his ups and downs as well. Neither of them were like perfect by any means, but you don't expect that when you're going to a camp with receivers you've never played with before. Right. So I liked what I saw from both of them. I think they certainly are different in terms of their mechanics, their athletic ability. But I think they're both very good quarterbacks that Notre Dame should be pretty happy about.
Yeah, from what I've seen on film, I would agree. I would put Grubbs slightly ahead, but it's not by a long shot by any means.
Yeah, and it was cool to see them working. C.J. Carr, Riley Leonard, and Steve Angeli, current Notre Dame quarterbacks, were running some of the quarterback drills. So that was awesome. Kind of cool to see those guys doing that. There was one drill where C.J. Carr was like the center, so he was snapping to the guys, and then they were doing some sort of read. And then Riley Leonard was playing the DB, and he was trying to pick them off. I think he did pick Noah Grubbs off in one of the reps. So it was interesting to see those guys and sort of the rapport they have, and they seem to have a very tight knit group in that quarterback room, both at Notre Dame and with the guys that they're recruiting to Notre Dame. You might not know this, Greg, but some of our people who read us may know this. Riley Leonard had a bunch of guys, receivers and some quarterbacks come down to Fairhope, Alabama, where he lives. And Phillip Rivers is also a high school coach down there, and they did sort of a private workout with Phillip Rivers with some of Notre Dame's quarterbacks and receivers, and even Deuce Knight came because Fairhope isn't that long of a ride from him there in Mississippi. So they all got to do some bonding down there together. So pretty cool situation with Riley Leonard being the new guy.
That's a good way to get in with your teammates, right? Like,
yeah.
Nice bonding moment.
Yeah, introducing him to Phillip Rivers. Everyone was like, man, this is pretty cool. So they got to spend some time together in addition to that. So I liked what I saw from the quarterbacks yesterday. They were definitely the headliners of the camp, knowing that you had 2 quarterback commits on campus. For sure. But outside of the quarterbacks, I was most interested in seeing Notre Dame's defensive line commits in action. Christopher Burgess Jr., Joseph Reif, and Dominic Kulak were all in attendance and competing, and they're all Chicago area guys. So I want to get your thoughts on them in addition to what I saw. Burgess, I know, is someone that keeps inching closer to 5-star status in the overall rankings on Rivals. He'll also be at the Rivals 5-star that we were talking about earlier. What do you like about him? What do you think would push him into that 5-star category?
Yeah, I think the thing, and I'm really curious on what you thought about seeing him in person too, is that he is a guy, I forget what he's actually listed at, maybe 260 to 265, somewhere in there. And he just absolutely does not look at that big. Like, he carries it so well. He carries his weight so well, and moves very well along that defensive line. I think he could be a guy that plays all along the defensive line in college, do a little bit of stand up on the edge as well. Probably just athletic enough to be able to do that too. So I really like his position versatility. I like that, and it goes to show about him going out to that camp and competing. I like that he always is willing to show up and compete. Like anytime Chris Burgess can go compete, it feels like he's going to do it. He's one of those kids that will do it, even though he's highly rated. And so I really like that about him. But yeah, carries his weight very well. And the thing that he can do to continue to improve his stock, I think, again, it's being able to see him against some of these elite offensive linemen from around the country, as we'll get a chance to see. If he continues to do some of the stuff that we've seen him do in other camp settings, I think he's going to have a real shot. And he's got kind of a thing, right or wrong, kind of in his back pocket, that we keep having these kind of 5-star defensive linemen from Chicago. And it's like, just, okay, is he the next one? If he goes out there and shows it, I think that he's got a shot.
Yeah, I need to check in with Notre Dame to see if I can get, or Chris, I haven't reached out to him either to see what he weighed in at yesterday. If he did weigh
maybe
in.
check the one that we had on him in Indy too.
I like Chris a lot. I think the thing in terms of like feeling strong about him being a 5-star, just maybe a little bit more burst from him on the edge. His pass rush is good. I think it's not quite that elite 5-star from my perspective.
Yep. I can see that.
Sometimes it's just, and I think maybe he's just so used to just beating guys with his strength or his speed at the level that he plays at. But yeah, when you talk about going against those elite offensive tackles, what else can you do to elevate yourself? You don't have to have a terribly advanced thing if you're great at it. I mean, Isaiah Foskey was great at Notre Dame, and he was pretty basic, I think, in the grand scheme of things in terms of pass rush moves, but he was very good at them, and so he was able to rack up a lot of sacks. Became Notre Dame's career sack leader.
248 is what he meant. What he made in at our camp.
He took his shirt. He was showing off. He took his shirt off, and he looked pretty good at the camp on Sunday. So I think for Notre Dame fans, I think I've mentioned Isaiah Foskey. I would say he's maybe more similar to a Khalid Kareem, who had a nice career at ND at this point in the recruiting process. So I think that's what I want to see. I'd like to see him sort of dominate. He was good yesterday. It wasn't like, oh my gosh, these guys can't be on the same field as him. But like I mentioned, Notre Dame has some good offensive tackles that get on campus for these kind of camps too. So it wasn't like he was going against scrubs either.
Which is helpful though. You want to see that competition though, right? Like that's always helpful
absolutely.
To actually see.
Yeah, I mean, he was out there taking plenty of reps and getting plenty of work in there, and certainly wasn't like taking it like I've earned my spot here. He was going after it just as hard as anybody.
Right.
Joseph Reif is a guy that we have at the back end of the Rivals 250 at number 237 overall. What do you like about him? Where do you think he can improve?
Yeah, I think I like that he's kind of a guy that has he's got a good frame. I think he's 6'5", 235. So a kid that definitely has a projectable frame that you like to see along that defensive line. I'd like to see more explosion out of him, like a guy that can really get after some guys. But as you continue to see that and build, and that can sometimes come with some more strength training as well, right? You get into a college weight room and get some more weight on you. You can work on some of those explosion things. So that's definitely what I'd like to see out of him.
Yeah, and he looked bigger. I think he told me he's up to around 250 now. So good. he's been progressing in the weight room. I agree with you, the sort of explosiveness off the edge. He's one of those guys where I wonder, it's like, okay, is he going to be a defensive end long term, or maybe is his ceiling higher as a defensive tackle? I'm curious to see
keep on growing.
Yeah, what his development looks like as it relates to that. He was another one that I don't think he necessarily dominated, but I did like, if there were moments where it seemed like he was getting stalled, he had counter moves to like, okay, this is what I'm going to do to get out of this. And so I liked what I saw from him in the yesterday's camp setting. Dominic Kulak is the other one that was there. Someone that Rivals still has ranked as an inside linebacker, but Notre Dame plans to use him at that Viper defensive end role that I was talking about, that they were giving Cam Thomas some reps at. Do you think that's a good use of Kulak's skill set?
Actually, it's funny that when you told me that, I was like, okay, that actually makes a lot of sense because I do think that he would fit that better than someone that's kind of like in space, sideline to sideline, that sort of thing. I think he definitely would be better hand in the dirt, closer to the line of scrimmage, closer to the ball, to be able to hold up there. Because he's another guy. It wouldn't surprise me if he's added another 15 pounds or so as well to what we have him listed at, because it's just that time of year, right? We'll have to go back through and update all these weights as guys go through their off-season training. But yeah, I definitely think that that's a better use of his skill set, which is good for him because it'll help him get on the field faster, and it'll make him make it easier for him to contribute.
Yeah, the Notre Dame's Viper recruiting has been interesting. They've done a lot of this guy where they recruit guys that played linebacker in high school, and then sort of develop them into this Viper role. Jordan Botello, Junior Tui Halamaka are guys, and I think he's more in that vein than someone like Boubacar Traore, who's sort of the next guy, big thing. We think he's been really flashing. He's going to be a sophomore this year. He's a really long, it seems more athletic than those guys. I would put him more in the Isaiah Foskey category than those other two guys. So I would put Kulak in the category with Botello and Tuihalamaka. I want to see maybe a little bit more explosiveness for him. I think that's something that you maybe like in terms of someone that's played linebacker and getting that on there. It still needs some development there. But I can sort of see what Notre Dame's trying to do with Kulak. And we'll see how his progression continues to move him forward, and knowing that's what they want him to do. And I think he'll have a chance to do plenty of that this fall at IC Catholic.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, it's funny. You got to have that explosion on defense now because you just need to be able to keep up with these offenses. And you just have to have a couple of those erasers on defense, right? That if a play breaks down and you need someone to go make a play, you're going to need some athleticism to be able to go do that.
All right, I'm going to grab a couple questions here before we get into some Midwest recruiting. Scott Fegan asked, the coaches and players look as good as any ND team has put together since the early 90s Holtz teams. If we can navigate the away games, do you see a couple wins in the playoffs? I don't know if Greg wants to make any bold predictions on Notre Dame for next season, but I can certainly let you know what I think. I think a couple of wins in the playoffs seems like a bit of a stretch. I think, obviously, if you've listened to me at all, I'm a bit concerned about Notre Dame's offensive tackles. How do those guys fill the big shoes of Joe Alt and Blake Fisher? Right. Charles Jagusah is the guy they're going with at left tackle. I think he will start the season there, still in a competition with Tosh Baker and Emil Wagner. I think Wagner is making a strong push to beat out Tosh Baker, who started the Sun Bowl in place of Blake Fisher. So that's a big question mark, and I think those are two spots you can't really have question marks to sort of predict a couple of wins in the playoffs. So I want to see how those guys do before I would sort of project playoff wins. I think they can get to the playoff even with maybe some shaky tackles with the schedule that Notre Dame has, but predicting playoff wins, you're probably going to be facing some pretty good pass rushers in the playoffs. So a couple of wins might be a little bit tough to ask.
As bold as you're going to get me to go on this is I do think that they can make the playoff. I'm not touching winning a couple games or not, though. But I also want to see what happens at quarterback. I want to make sure everybody's healthy, make sure Riley Leonard's healthy and is upright for the season. And that tackle situation does not, necessarily help with that quest either.
Yeah. George Gibb asked, what is going on with Rubio? As we've repeatedly said, he's returning to the team this summer. That was re-emphasized by Marcus Freeman last week, so that is still the plan. Ed Quillard, how about that new wide receiver recruit? I think Buchner is his name. I don't know if you saw this, Greg, but Tyler Buchner announced on Friday that he's returning to Notre Dame's football program as a walk-on wide receiver. He transferred to Alabama to play football at quarterback, ended up being the backup. He started one game, and he came back to Notre Dame in the spring or in the winter to play lacrosse this spring, and saw some playing time on the lacrosse team and decided, I don't want to leave Notre Dame. If Marcus Freeman will take me back, I want to have some sort of role in the program. I think there was even a talk about being like a player coach or something like not even being a player, just being like a student assistant in some way
or something.
Yeah, and so they said, hey, if you want to walk on, we'll find a role for you. They want to keep him out of the quarterback room, I think, but using him as a receiver. Maybe they can use him as a scout team quarterback in some situations, especially as like an option quarterback when Notre Dame goes against some option teams. So kind of a cool story for folks. Yeah. I imagine most Notre Dame's fans saw that, but it's kind of interesting to see how much he really wants to be at Notre Dame and has decided that that's what he wants to do moving forward.
I did see that, and that my immediate thought, honestly, was that it's a fun story. It'll be great, kind of in those dog days of August, like when you can, hopefully they make him available, and then you guys can dive deep into that story.
Yeah. Tyler's always been a fun kid to interview, a very nice kid. So interested to talk to him. He had a very nice letter that he released with that news. All right, quickly, I don't want to take too much more of your time, Greg. Let's just hit some 2026 recruiting. In the Midwest. I know mentioned earlier that Rivals is unveiling new rankings for the 2026 class this week. Notre Dame's been busy working ahead in that class. Overall, how would you compare the talent level in the Midwest in 2026 compared to 2025?
Yeah, I really like the talent in the 2026 group, actually. I think it compares very favorably, especially at that top end. Jackson Cantwell, Maxwell Riley, two big offensive tackles that could end up both being 5 stars. Jackson Cantwell, obviously already a 5-star. Maxwell Riley out of Ohio, I think will continue to be in the conversation as we move along through the cycle. This is another, I feel like I'm a broken record. I've said this, I'm sure I said it to you before. I say it to every one of our guys in in the Midwest at a team site. It's another year for tight ends. Like tight ends in the Midwest for 2026 are ridiculous. Like there's so many good ones. And so Notre Dame should be able to get one of those really elite tight ends where you can really take your pick, because there's a few of them out there.
One area that Notre Dame has been active in, specifically in Illinois, is the defensive line and getting those guys on campus as well. The trio of Braden Jones, Mikhail Blade, Gabriel Hill. Which of those guys do you like best?
Oh boy, that's tough because, well, first of all, Mikhail Blade is on the all-name team
exactly
off the rip, so yeah, that helps. But I think Braden Jones is my favorite of the two, or of the three, and all three of them are very good. But Braden Jones, man, is a classic defensive end with heavy hands, really powerful kid, but is quick enough off the line too. Like I really like that kid. Seen him a couple of times actually, and he's a very good player. But defensive line too, right up there with tight end. If you can land a guy or two from that group, you're going to be cooking in the 26 class.
Yeah, and his size is legit. When I saw him when he was on campus for a visit, I was like, "Oh, that's legit." He's not. There's no padding of his.
We're not pledging numbers on that one.
No. You mentioned Jackson Cantwell. He's ranked as one of the top players in the class. How does he compare to the top offensive tackles in the 2025 class?
Yeah, I think that he compares right there with all of those guys. And anytime, I tell you that both of a kid's parents are Olympians or were Olympians, you're going to think, okay, that kid's got some good genes. Both of his parents were Olympic throwers. Jackson also throws and just continues. Every time I look up, he's setting some sort of state record in throwing, but he's also a fantastic football prospect as well. 6'8", 300 plus, can really bend and move. Want to see him against elite competition. Like we've talked a lot about guys going out and camping and seeing them against some of these other top guys. That's really the only thing missing with him that would really, and the funny thing is we're talking about missing. He's ranked number 2 in the nation. So like if he wants to, if he wants to push Jakeem Stewart out of that number 1 spot, he's going to have to go against Jakeem Stewart in one of these camps. But, he's a great prospect.
All right. And then lastly, before we let you get out of here, what Notre Dame has offered several recruits across the Midwest in the 2026 class. Like I mentioned, the Pot of Gold Day is when they sent a bunch of those out. Is there any guys that come to mind when I ask you who in the Midwest should Notre Dame be pushing for that they haven't been already?
Oh, that they haven't been already? That's a really good question that they haven't been, because I was going to go with one that I think they're in a good spot with, and that's J.C. Anderson, the tight end, 4-star tight end out of Illinois. That's one to definitely watch. He's got them really high on his list, but that's a great question. Someone that they haven't pushed for that they could continue to go for, because the other one, have they recruited Titan Davis at all?
No, they've been by the school, but they have not offered him yet.
That would be one. That's another. That's your next big time St. Louis prospect. Like there is always some every year. And Titans on another one of those defensive linemen. You can never have enough of those guys. So I'll say Titan Davis is a kid out of St. Louis that I definitely think they need to get more involved with. Yeah,
and there's another one in St. Louis that I know they haven't offered yet, and I know it was at a rivals camp in Indianapolis. That's Keenan Harris. Notre Dame hasn't offered him yet. Jaden McGregory, I know, is someone that rivals likes a bit out of Iowa. That's someone that Notre Dame hasn't offered. So those are some of the names that maybe are worth watching as the cycle progresses in terms of where Notre Dame maybe doubles back and decides, we really like this guy, and let's make a push for him.
Yeah, and those are a couple of guys, too, that are continuing to get better, especially when you think about Harris, who, spoiler alert, I think is about to rise like 90 spots in our ranking. So, he's continuing to elevate his stock and get better. Really liked him at linebacker, as he's kind of like Cam Thomas that we talked about earlier. Very similar. I think that Keenan's a little more fluid of an athlete at this point. And so I'd be curious if he had been at that camp and got thrown into that defensive line drill, how he would have held up as well.
Yeah, from my recollection, I think Keenan's a bit thicker too, or at least he looks physically thicker than Cam does. So I think he might. I think it would be interesting to see how Keenan Harris continues to develop and where he ends up, because I think he's an athlete, but then did some linebacker stuff, and we'll see. I think he has a very high ceiling, and obviously, like you mentioned, you guys are all over that, and his official ranking will be released Tuesday. So maybe if you're watching this on replay, his new ranking will be unveiled. So Greg didn't spoil anything there.
There it is. There, good.
All right. Well, that will be it for this week's show. Eric should be back with me next week, and we'll likely be back on Monday night again. I'm hoping to book someone for our Inside Indie Sports podcast later this week. Thank you, Greg, for joining us tonight. Like we mentioned at the top of the show, make sure you subscribe to the channel. Go subscribe to InsideNDSports.com with the promo code NDYT, and enjoy your week.